Hey, where are we? Yama, g'day everybody, and welcome. How you going? Thanks for joining us late night and day. It's late night here in Australia. Laid back with Luna. Tonight we got Nese will be joining us in a minute, but tonight I got a special guest here to talk to us through the native lens, and sit back and listen, and I'm sure we're going to have some good gold nuggets of knowledge again this week. And tonight we have with us John Hunter. G'day, John. How you going?
Yeah, come on, good. Yama.
Yama. Can you speak a little closer to your mic because it's a bit muffly?
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, Yama. How are you? How's everybody?
Yeah, we're good here. Sorry about it being so late, but when Nese joins us, it's very early for him.
No, that's okay.
Thank you for joining us, and thank you for sharing the knowledge that you'll be sharing with us. So I should introduce John properly. I'm bad for introductions, you probably all know that. So I'll let John introduce himself, actually. John, if you want to introduce yourself, brother.
Yeah, Yama. So, yeah, my name is John, and I live in Western Sydney. It's actually the biggest. Greater Western Sydney is the biggest urban intertribal Aboriginal community in Australia. There's around 41,000 Aboriginal people between Parramatta and the mountains. So that's my community I grew up in, but my people are Gummurai and Wiradjuri. Yibai Ngare Ningarangai, my totem is a black snake. Ngare Gulda Gummurai, I speak in Gummurai. And yeah, my people are from northwestern New South Wales, but I live in the urban centre in Western Sydney. There's a lot of different mobs out here, a lot of different people and communities, so it's a very large community. Nobody would really think that in Western Sydney you got the biggest Aboriginal community in Australia because it's urban, but when you come out this way, we are the biggest community, and we're integrated amongst the diversity of Western Sydney of multicultural Australia. So unlike other places in Sydney, like for instance in the city in Redfern or La Perouse, it's known as the Aboriginal community, but the biggest population is in the Greater Western Sydney area. I think it's matched by Brisbane in Inala. That's another big area, big mob of Aboriginal people, intertribal community. Yeah, so I'd like to acknowledge the country I'm on, all the spirits of place, the great creator of all things, and acknowledge all the listeners. And I hope you are all well and in good spirits.
Oh, that was nice. Thanks, John. So the first question that comes out of my thing, and I kind of wanted to wait for Nese, but we'll just keep yarning. You were saying we live in there's heaps of mobs here that we live with from different places, but we all manage to keep our culture intact. And given the times that we're in, and you and me know that culture is really important to us because it helps keep us centered. And what I want to know, in old times, well, they really wouldn't have had to stay centered because they were living in paradise. But what sort of things would you recommend for people culturally to stay centered in this crazy time that we have? Like, do you recommend them to learn language or practice dancing or painting? Like, because I think it's a really important thing to hold on to in this day and age, what we're going through.
Yeah, I think every culture originally is connected to the earth and the natural world. So if you can go into the park or in a in a reserve, a national park, or in the bush and connect with the bush, and even if you've got a front garden and you've got nicer plants and trees, that's what helps keeps you centered. And or the river or the ocean,
The river,
those
no
things
water.
help you out. That's what helps me. Because
Yeah,
I mean, everybody's got culture. Some people, especially for us as Aboriginal people, some Aboriginal people don't have a lot of traditional knowledge because of what happened to us and continuing to happen to us with assimilation and stolen generation. So, some Aboriginal people understanding of culture is all about focused, all about and focused on all the trauma we've gone through. But then that's the contemporary side. When we look at the traditional side, that's about the strong traditional values. So everyone's got culture all around the world, all different communities and people, but it's just what makes that culture. Is it traditional values or the universal values of our ancestors or in our families, extended families, or is it contemporary mainstream culture, which is all about materialism, commodities, and trying to be famous and having some sort of following. But those aren't really traditional values because um, they're not what keep me grounded. So yeah, connection to the country. But as I said, culture is very diverse. Some people don't see connection to country as important, but for us as Aboriginal people, it is very important.
yeah, I think it is. And we've got Brother Nese here. G'day, Nese. Welcome.
Oh, sure. The minute I put a bite of banana in my mouth, you then talk to me.
Yeah, and you know what the funny thing is, your timings is always perfect. As I put up a Native American picture on the screen, you popped on.
Oh, well, I've said it before and I'll say it again. I'm now preferring the title or label as Paleo American. As much as I'm not a big fan of the label Aborigine, I've referred to you, Luna, my sister, and my brother John as Paleo Australians.
Paleo. It sounds like some sort of ice cream or paddle pop. Sorry, it's just new to me.
Well, the ice cream called Paleo American, you would purchase it and you'd buy it, and then you'd open it up and you'd realize there's nothing in it because they've taken everything from us, including our ice cream.
Oh, that's so true.
Niji.
Anin.
Yeah. I'll refer to you as Nishnabe. Makwadodem.
Yeah, I know. I didn't even come in traditional today. I don't know. I'll digress a moment. Bujuan Nin, Nese Indigenicas, Anishinaabe, Kevin Richard Shores, Indigenicas Jaganashi Moog, Makwanindu Minawanindo Gichida, Ki, Mother Earth, Minawa, Gawababi Gani Cog, White Earth Reservation, Minawa, Moorhead, Minnesota, Nungumin Day, Chimigwich, Gichimanadu, Gani Kana, Gani Kana, Gani Kana, Gani Kana. Brother, it's good to hear your voice. It's been as the kids nowadays say, it's been a minute.
Yeah, lots been going on. Yeah, especially since Captain moved on to the next realm. So
yes, here in October, meaning the 8th ember of the night sky, we're now almost at the 12th new moon of the passing of Captain. Strange, it's almost a full cycle around the sun. Maybe not. But yeah, it's about time we can do one of those wiping away the tears ceremony and give acknowledgement to our incredible relative, Kev Baker. Didn't mean to bring it down too much there, sorry.
No, that's all right, because I had the thoughts in the near future that we're going to do something like that, but also for everybody that everybody's lost in the last couple of years also, but mainly for our Captain brother. But we've all lost some other people very close to us, so I thought we'd do something like in that realm. They say, you see, spot on. And again, that's what we were talking about when you popped in, Nese, was how important culture is to keep yourself centered and functioning in this realm, especially over the last few years. And something as simple as, like Brother John was saying, going down to the river, singing, doing a painting, or anything.
Shall we gather at the river so they can drown us? No, we're going to baptize you. But, a little bit of my story, unless you wanted to go ahead, John, sorry.
Nah, you go ahead, brother.
Well, I was raised Lutheran. I was raised as that family rushing to church. And in that whole realm of experiencing that, at some point, I thought it was very, the hypocrisy was relevant. And I had a hard time at that young age separating the individuals from the religion, the spirituality. And so at some point I told my dad I didn't want to go anymore. And so he couldn't argue, because my father was a truck driver. He was gone Monday through Friday, and he only had the weekends to do the maintenance on the house. And so he didn't afford the time, or felt he didn't need the time to go to church, because he had his own relationship with his deity or God. And so for about 7-8 years, I didn't have a specific religion or anything. But I always felt there was some higher power. As they say, there's always a bigger fish. So when you keep going from big fish to big fish, there has to be something enormous. And then unfortunately, it was when I got out of the military and I started to become sick with Gulf War illness that I believe I have. Then we start reflecting on the end. And so I started researching different religions, and I went through the gauntlet. All the three major, Christian and Jewish and Muslim or Hebrew. And then I started looking into Buddhist and Taoism and Shinto and even Wicca, and just the gauntlet. And then the one that the Baha'i, very interesting. We should talk about that faith sometime. But then trying to find all these religions, because it's like, well, who's right? Who could be right with all these different religions? And then my girlfriend at the time, she's like, well, what about your own heritage? And I'm like, duh. So I started looking at my own heritage and finding information claiming that my ancestors were here in North America for over 100,000 years. And I'm like, okay, so how can all of these other religions that claim to be, at least 6,000 years old, how can they stand up to a religion that's over 100,000 years old, where a people, a group of entities, were on a continent for 100,000 years figuring out what berries should I eat, where should we camp, how should we become symbiotic with our surroundings. And so then I started pursuing that spirituality, and then I went to a sweat lodge. And a sweat lodge, for those that don't know, is a little dome structure on the earth where in the center it has a pit where there's a bunch of rocks that are heated in a fire, and then they're brought into the lodge and they close it all up, and you go through a ritual ceremony. And that first experience, I hugged Mother Earth and wept and cried like a child. And it was almost like my the microcosm within my body, like the genetic composition of me started waking up when it heard that old man beating his drum and singing those songs. And I knew from that moment on, this is where my existence was, my heart was, my mind was, my spirituality and my emotional. And I've been there ever since. And that was back in 1991. And so I'm thankful because of all of the challenges, the struggles that I have gone through since then. I always turn back to my spiritualism as a Anishinaabe and Nene to get through that. And it has worked very well from my perspective. So, Shanab in the house.
Oh,
Hey, yeah, okay. So there you go. The importance of your culture. I could go into what happened to me, but it was quite the opposite. And they say, I don't know about you, John, but I remember one day going to church, and I walked in and I was shocked at what I saw in there from a spiritual point of view. And I ran back outside, and I explained to my mum that the sky and the ground was the roof and the earth. It was the floor of the Creator's church, and I didn't want to go in there into the church. And it wasn't because I'm a bad person or anything. I just didn't, what I saw in there, and I don't want to get into that because it's someone else's religion, and they have respect for it and all that. And I got respect for other people where they stand, but it wasn't my thing. And so I stuck to what I knew. And then when I was older, similar like you, Nese, I checked out other religions. No, and I didn't want to get into them. I was just curious about what they thought as opposed to what I was exposed to when I was young. I wanted to see what other religions would like. And the one thing I found they all had in common that our native cultures don't. It says if you don't believe what we believe, you can't have this. And it's like, well, that's exclusive, isn't it? Like, where's the unconditional love there? So I stuck with what I knew, and then similar as I grew up, got into our own culture, and it just fitted like a glove. And I realised I was in it the whole time. So, and like I said, I don't know about you, John. When you went to church, did you go to church?
I only when I had to, but yeah, I think I've I've had a similar journey. I mean, Catholicism, born again Christianity, Islam, and you go a big circle and you come back and you just see that our Aboriginal way of seeing things through the that lens is actually more, in many ways, logical and actually more human and loving, because we don't see it like a football game where you're wearing one jersey, someone's wearing another jersey, you're supporting one team, someone else is supporting the other team, and there's a contested place, and you've got to win, because if you're not in my team, then you're not going to heaven, or you're not going to the spirit world, that is where good people go. So the mainstream religions is all about, in many ways, like it's like a club. Like, my worldview is the worldview you've got to be at, but our Aboriginal way of understanding the world respects everybody and respects every spirituality and belief. And there's a circle, and everybody has a place in the circle. And just because it's different doesn't mean it's wrong, because at the end of the day, it's the great creator of all things that made everything, that binds us all together in that spiritual connection. So as long as you follow the spiritual, you know, universal values, as they may call it today, of kindness, love, respect, connection to the natural world, connection to everything the great creator created, we will be okay. But, the religions which are so strongly in our lives through mainstream society, what they say and what they do in many ways is very different. So
I wonder what Team Christianity, what their uniforms would look like on the football team. Considering us Native Americans, we have our our mascot time. Why not we have some other mascots like the Christian and the Muslim and the Hebrew?
yeah.
Go Team Allah. But if one of the most the ultimate reason of why I was so accepting of the Anishinaabe spirituality is, as I learn these rituals and these ceremonies, and I say, okay, is this how it's done? And then they would be like, well, is that what feels right? And if it feels right, then you participate in it. It's almost like recognizing that resonance within, and when the resonance without, they match, then you have a beautiful chorus, a beautiful chord. And if I was to take my spiritualism of the Anishinaabe people and put it in one word, it would be respect. Because the main teaching is that I am I, and you are you, and you have your path, your Bimad Ziwe, and that is your path to go on. And sometimes we'll utilize maps, we will utilize suggestions, we'll utilize experiences to go down that path. And we'll see signpost, and we'll see, the treacheries of that path, but it's still ours to journey. And so that respect of the entity within and those entities beyond your own existence is held so high that it's like, okay, we're all in it together, so let's do it. And like you were saying, it was challenging when you would discuss these other religions where they were, if you're not on my team, then you must die. And I like the cliche, there are many causes that I am willing to die for, but there is no cause for which I am willing to kill.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
Very true.
I like that one. Hey, here's another question. So, in our tribal religion, when people misbehave, we had ways of dealing with it, and we know when we come up against the system's way, which is going to jail and stuff like that, we knew that was wrong, and we can we talk about how we dealt with people that misbehaved. Are we allowed to talk about that?
Yeah, well, I think for us in Australia, I mean, we're one of the most highly imprisoned people on the planet. Where, like, for instance, in Northern Territory, I think 99% of the youth in detention are all Aboriginal. In, you know, the statistics are where from, what, 27 to 40% overrepresented in jail. And you have to ask the question, why is that? Are we born criminals?
No.
Or is it criminal for a system to institutionally discriminate against Aboriginal people, to put us behind bars and give us custodial sentences, while those in the mainstream who commit the same offences get off on bail or get off on community service? And the statistics show that if you have an Aboriginal person and a non-Aboriginal person, for instance, drink driving, and there's, you know, past history of drink driving in the past, like, Aboriginal people will go to jail. And that's the reality. So the system of justice is not about justice, it's about control. And our old way, our old people's way, was about a system that tried to keep the community in balance. So if you've done something wrong, it was about you being able to make amends and right the wrong. So depending on what you did, you know, there'll be a community, a circle of elders that will then look at the law, which they call bigan in the language, bigan, and then they'll sit with everybody and make a decision that is in the best interest of the community and the individual. So you might, for instance, if you stole something or you done, you know, something like that, you might get speared or you might get hit or you might get, you know, like, it's very different from being locked up in jail, because that gives you long-term mental health problems. But our system of justice was about what's best for people, what's best for community. Whereas mainstream, the British Commonwealth system, is about punitive action to punish, from their system to punish. But you only have to be born Aboriginal to be punished in this colonial, you know, psyche of a system. So our old way of doing business is much better, and now they're trying to incorporate that with things like circle sentencing, where we've got groups of elders that sit with the courts and then make determinations for young people and support the young people so they understand what they've done wrong and how they can make amends for those people that they've caused harm and offence to. And that's more in the lens of our old way of doing business. So it's a positive thing that's happening. Long way to go, but it's a good step forward.
Yeah, it is. Like you said, a long way to go. It takes time to get there, but we are seeing results. Have you got anything similar like that, Nese, like the sending circle, where you have a little bit of governance over your own people when it comes to the youth and people that do things wrong?
Well, in the American justice system, the joke goes, what do you call a Paleo American in a courtroom? Guilty.
Yeah.
We can adapt that.
And I guess I'm allowed to do that because that is my ethnicity. I don't know. Maybe we'll find out. But we had a system of people referred to it as counting coup, because the ultimate rule or ultimate law was you do not kill someone. If you kill somebody, then you disrupt the function of that circle, that community around that individual. This was one of the reasons why Native Americans, they wore war paint, because they did not want the creator, Gitchimanadu, to see who they were in the event that they would take another life. So they had this thing called counting coup, where individuals would have a coup stick. And if me and John had a challenge between us, that if I went up and touched him with my coup stick, that was as if I even killed him. And sometimes that would occur right away. But then first it would be, I would go up to John and say, hey, John, I have a challenge with you. How do we rectify the challenge? And then me and John worked it out. And if we weren't able to work it out, then I would come and bring a witness with me, and I would, a moon phase or something would come by, and I'd say, hey, John, you still haven't worked that out. I brought a witness, so, we can discuss this with the witness. And so we come up with the plan. And then if that plan is not met, then I can go before council. And then in the center of the council, there'd be a coup stake. And then me and John, we would have our discussion and our debate or whatever about the challenge between us. And then we would have to figure out before the council how to make it right. And or the council would dictate what to do to make it right. And then if it got to a heated thing, then there would be the coup sticks, where we had different challenges or competitions, and from that we would go on. Because incarceration, unless especially if it's a victimless crime, to be incarcerated for an extremely long time is, as John stated, extremely hard on the individually, mentally, and then the challenge of being reintroduced into society, where they've had many examples of unsuccessful occurrences of this happening, where more likely you're going to stay in a life of crime when you're in the system of crime, the prison system. And let us not forget the multi-million-dollar system of incarceration. And that is one of the major challenges, where these prisons now have become a corporation or a business, and more about rehabilitating the wrongdoing of others.
And that's the system here too. Like with the prisons and new prisons, it's all about business. You go and work and support an industry, which is very different, from trying to rehabilitate someone. And our traditional law was very much the same. You try to work it out. If you can't work it out, it goes to the elders' council. Although if there's a breach of the law that the elders find out about, or the community understands, or somebody, the victim explains about what has happened, then the elders will take it into their responsibility to try to facilitate and fix it up. But if you can't fix it up, if you've done something very serious, then you'll be punished for it.
Well, and going back a little bit to the whole religion or the spirituality, it was a 24/7 occurrence, that you were spiritual all the time. It wasn't like I go to church on Sunday or I go on Easter and stuff. And that was one of the biggest challenges that my ancestors had with Christianity, because when the Christians would say, yeah, when we do something wrong, we confess our sins to Jesus Christ and everything is better. And we couldn't understand that, because we were more of the ideology of, okay, I did you wrong, John. I'm sorry. Pity and forgive me. What can I do to make it right? And so it's John who has to set the standards of finding the balance of what occurred. So that holds me accountable for my actions. And interesting enough, if you look in Catholicism, they actually have where you can pay tithings, and if you pay enough tithings, then you can wash away your trespasses.
It doesn't work like that.
That shows you the lens and the worldview that where that belief system is at, and it's the same.
But they
for
could
us.
be right. I'm going to give them that sliver. There is no scientific absolute, so I'm going to say I don't believe that's the way 99.97.
Well,
but
I mean,
who knows?
Yeah, the money in the world doesn't mean nothing to a great spiritual power. So the money is all about making amends or restitution with money. That's on this world. This is the physical world. It's not the spiritual world. So what you said, Niji, is about your spiritual being and is 24/7. It's not. It doesn't stop on a Sunday, or you say penance and that's it. You give some money and it's all fixed. It doesn't work like that. And that's the same thing that happened in Australia too, is with the churches. Like our granny and my mum, like their stolen generation was a Catholic church that organised for her to be taken off our grandmother. It was an institution that sexually abused our grandmother, and all those things from institutions that preach love, forgiveness, kindness, protection of young people, and all these sort of values, yet they are the biggest abusers. And it's listed in Stolen Generations. So it's the Christian, different Christian denominations were one of the biggest forces in causing so much harm to Aboriginal people.
If I may, real quick, John, sorry, a disclaimer. The views and opinions of today's guests only reflect on their own perception of experience. We have no collective agenda of swaying you this way or that way. We are just having conversation and dialogue in the hopes that individuals can hear the positivity in the words we share and utilize them to find their own positivity or minimally neutralize the negativity. Was that pretty good off the fly?
Yeah, I reckon.
That is good.
You
Because
rehearsed
I
that?
don't want to beat up. I don't want to beat up the Christians.
No,
Because
well, it's. I'm not beating up on anyone, but that's a fact of history. That's a reality which where our family's still dealing with the trauma, intergenerational trauma that has come from that past. And my mother's a Catholic, and she has her own spirituality, which is an Aboriginal spirituality, but she's a Catholic, and she will say that the teachings of Jesus, peace be upon him, as a prophet and a teacher to the people, is very different in many ways to the way that institutions and individuals that represent a religion act. Whereas some do, some don't. But unfortunately, it's the ones that don't that cause that ongoing harm, and um, it's not addressed. I mean, I I respect all beliefs.
well, I've said this many times, but I am okay if you worship an egg and you plant it at dawn on a new moon, and then you unbury it on a full moon at dusk, and you pray over it again for 27 hours, and then it hatches a lizard. And at the next equinox or solstice, whichever is closer, you have to lick that lizard. If that whole process helps you become a positive person where you're creating positivity, then by all means, lick the lizard. So if you practice Muslim, Hebrew, Christianity, Shinto, whatever is your choice. If you are generally positive, by all means, do what you do. I'm cool with that. It's when these individuals create negativity where I have the major challenge.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's when they force it upon another against their will, and they go into their lives and control their lives against their will in the name of their belief. That's where it's wrong, because you shouldn't step that boundary. You should have respect for others.
and
But
the other thing is, like, I don't know any religion or spiritual belief that says go and cause harm on people, because the great creator, or the creator power that you follow is happy with that. I mean, not unless you're, a Satanist, or, I mean, I don't even want to make assumptions about Satanism. I don't know about it.
I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah, I don't know many religions that want to cause harm to people. So it's not so much the spiritual belief, or the worldview. It's more the practitioners and the institutions which use that as a excuse to justify their actions without remorse or restitution. So when we look at the prophets, Muhammad, peace be upon him, all the prophets around the world, Jesus, when we look at Buddhism, when we look at all those different lenses, it's all about a reflection of the universal values and connection, which unfortunately gets corrupted by institutions and individuals that like to
Individuals,
use as an excuse.
and put their cruelty upon another. Because traditionally, if we had someone in the mob putting cruelty on somebody like that, what would have happened to them? I know in Nese's mob, they used to cook people up.
What they would do is they would take the council of elders would sit and look at the law and then make a determination, and depending on what that person done, they would be punished. So if they done a foul, if they done child molestation or some really evil sort of thing like that, like, you could be faced with being speared or being killed. So the law, the rule of justice, bidan they call it, was about the safety and well-being of the community and the individual as a member of a community. So it was person centered, but it was also community centered at the same time. So it was a balance, which is very different to the system of justice. And you know, um, yeah, that's a dilemma, because there still is tribal law in Australia, like, but it clashes with mainstream law.
Yeah, it does. Do you, like I said, no, we know traditionally Nase's mob cooked people up when they did the wrong thing. What other kinds of things did you have, Nase, when people did the wrong thing?
Well, that is what they told the slaves in order to keep the slaves on the plantations, was do not go out into the woods because the indigenous people would eat you. And if we are to critically look historically of what occurred on this planet, there are several records that talk about the time of when the so-called, for lack of a better label, humans were eating themselves. When Mother Earth went through a huge catastrophe, and it was a mingling of the waters, where the salt water came upon the land and mingled with the fresh water, and there was no water to drink, and it destroyed the flora and the fauna, and all of the animals were eaten. How do you get liquid and nutrients? The only left to eat was each other. And so there was a period where this happened around the world. And unfortunately, there were some that said, hey, I still like the fact that humans taste like chicken. And so I am not a supporter of, as we used to talk about, extracurricular carnivorous activities.
Strange meats.
Right.
It's another word, strange meats.
That was a Freaky Friday flashback there. Extracurricular carnivorous activities.
Yeah, you probably get killed for that, John, if you got caught eating someone.
Oh yeah, see, we have our traditional stories about cannibalism and the cannibals in the past. So
Yeah.
that was seen as something that is really a bad thing.
But we have a term called Wendigo. And the Wendigo is, if you were to look at the full spectrum, and you would have positive on one end and you would have negative on the other end. On the negative aspect would be the Wendigo, and on the positive would be the Wendigo con. And so, it would be like saying God, positive, devil, negative. It's that full, I call it my holy trinity, positive, neutral, and negative, because that's the simplification of everything. You can't get any more simpler than that by looking at everything in those three states. And so negative definitely would be where you would find people eating each other and drinking of their blood. However, when it comes to magic with a K and not magic or prestidigitation, there are those individuals that do rituals and ceremonies that involve such sacrifice.
And for us, if you do that, what you're sacrificing to is dark beings, because that's what feeds on that negativity. That shadow is the dark beings, and they're the ones that will manipulate and try to get that food for them.
And we're not talking about black beans or kidney beans. We're talking about negative entities, beings.
It's our accent, John.
Accent.
Yeah.
Beings.
And knowing that in comparison to what's happening today from a native lens, we can see certain things because of that. Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, that comes to the question of entities that are in league with, how about we just call them black beans?
Black beans, all right.
Is there a white bean?
Yeah, there is the one that baked beans are made of. What are they called?
Well, there's kidney beans, black beans. Well, there's a whole bunch of legumes.
Soya beans, human beans.
I'm starting to get hungry.
Eat a black bean.
You shouldn't be eating this late at the night. It's not good to go to bed with a full belly. That's why I get to eat, because I'm just getting up.
Yeah, so today, with all the things we have, people doing bad magic, the electronic system we have that's like a scrying mirror, the things that are being taught in general society that are far away from what we would call a tribal way of living. So how do you see those black beings in today's society? What do they look like?
Well, everything looks black to me, Luna.
Oh, sorry, yeah, it does too.
Well, I call them the powers that should not be. And these individuals are dealing with negativity. And it's interesting how they are using technology to mimic the natural world. where, again, in some of these ancient writings that are found, they talk about a technology that was more earth based, and where we, the entities, would put the energy, the power, the essence into tools of natural organic composition and use them as like a cell phone. Like there's stories about where, like you were talking about with scribing, you know, there's stories about where people would have huge crystals and they would use these crystals for communicating back and forth. Also, when you look at the whole magic mirror, you know, it wasn't like a basic, simple Walmart Mylar mirror. You know, it was intricate. It was forged out of metals in a certain pattern with particulars and symbols or iconography. And then they would pour the glass, because even making glass in itself, you know, countries went to war trying to steal each other's glass recipes and their cement recipes.
Wow.
And these were the wizards.
They
These
went
were
to
the
war
wizards.
over mixing cement.
Well, you know, that at some point, someone said, hey, I want a monolith devoted to this, that, or the other thing. You know, and at some point they were like, oh, well, let's just carve this granite. Excuse me. You know, they would go into the earth. And that was another thing that my ancestors were just like, what are you doing to Mother Earth?
Yeah.
You know, why? You know, they were okay with like utilizing stuff that was on the surface area, but to dig, you know, but if you find it and stuff, but I am finding contradictions of this because of the mining of copper in Wisconsin and Michigan. They found all these copper caves that my ancestors allegedly were trading with the Phoenicians for copper.
Wow.
Yeah, they're testing copper found in Europe and finding out that it came from Wisconsin and Michigan and that area. And if you heard, I can't remember if it was in Lake Superior or Lake Michigan, they just found, well, they didn't just find it, they released the information that a pyramid was found there.
Wow.
Under the lake.
What stories do we have of trading with other people from other lands, John?
Um, well, the stories are they are representative of, you know, the worldview of the old people. So they don't say, "Oh, we traded with um, anybody that, you know, the outside culture would understand." So, for instance, we wouldn't say, "Oh, we're trading with Chinese people or this or that." We would give that Aboriginal name for them people. So you have to try to interpret who it is. But you know, in Australia as a continent, you had Aboriginal people in Northern Territory and Western Australia trading with people from Indonesia, from Sulawesi, you know, and that whole trade route went up into China. Then you had people trading in PNG, Papua New Guinea, and in the Pacific. So, you know, we were regional as far as trading, as what I know. But you know, we traded all throughout the continent with each other, and you know, we had those connections. But when you're talking about connection, there, see, from our old people, there's no fences in the spirit world. So, you know, you can connect with someone in Turtle Island. You can connect with someone in in Ireland or in Scotland or in where Lebanon might have been with the Phoenicians. So the spirit world is something that binds us all through that great creator. And you can exchange knowledge, meet, talk, connect in that spirit world beyond the realm of the physical. So as far as physical trading, there's a limitation. But trading and connecting spiritually is another thing.
Yep. Do you remember when you found that Abyssinian spearhead, and I showed you I had one from America that was the same and it disappeared? Do you remember that? It was a long time ago, and you found it at Bunnings.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
That's where they done the development
yeah,
and they come up out of the ground when they put the bulldozers through.
yeah, because that was proof of trade.
Yeah, that was a spearhead or a stone knife that was made out of that black glass.
Yeah, volcanic glass.
I forgot the name of it. Yeah, volcanic glass.
Obsidian?
Yep,
Yeah, that's it, obsidian.
yep. That was proof of trade. That was. Unfortunately, it disappeared. But we know that we traded with other people. Yeah, well, a big question that's on people's minds, especially in this day and age, because they're all coming to native people to find certain answers spiritually. Oh shit, I forgot what I was going to ask now. I'll just backtrack 2 seconds. I got the cat at the back door. It's distracting me bad because he's really noisy. He was on the show last week, if everyone remembers. Oh yeah, spiritually, everyone. What people came here, John, for looking for spiritual knowledge before the English planted their flag. Is there any recollection of that?
Well,
Mobs?
see, our people were in the rivers on the other side of the Great Dividing Range, the mountains that divide the coast from the plains on the other side of the west of the mountains, the interior of Australia. So our people were a little bit removed from the coast. So I can't talk about coastal stories because our people aren't from the coast.
Yeah.
And if I did learn something, it would be for them people to speak about with that cultural authority rather than me. But there's nothing that I can recall apart from stories of people possibly engaging with mob in the Pacific. But I mean, I can't, as I said, I won't talk about it because I don't have the knowledge or authority to speak about that.
Yeah. And you haven't really heard anything. You don't have to say the story, but you haven't heard any stories implying to that.
Now, I have heard a story, coastal stories about people who talk about whales. That whales represent other people.
Yep.
But I can't. Yeah, I can't really talk about too much because I don't have that. As I said, I don't have the authority, and I don't know the story well enough because there's different layers of every story.
Yeah, I know. All right then.
So if John, on Australia, if you think of Australia, it's kind of more oblong. I'm trying to remember from the maps that it's kind of actually it's a little kind of like a bean, but not with a major curve. Now, isn't there like two major mountain ranges on both ends of the continent, but inland somewhat?
So if you think about, um, you know, let me try to think so you can see it in your mind. So, you know, like a Scottish Terrier, like a dog's face, where you got the ears pointing up, like a short, sharp, pointy ears, and then the dog's forehead, and then its snout. But where the snout is, it'd just say it's like flat. So it's a bit more flat. That's the sort of shape, bean shape, but with Cape York, which is the top part of Queensland, jutting up, and then it goes across. You have a hump, and like the snout comes down and around. So the East Coast has a mountain range that goes all the way up the east coast of the continent, which is called the Great Dividing Range. And on the Great Dividing Range, it divides the west western plains from the coast. So that's the main mountain range that comes. It's like the spine of the east coast. It goes all the way from Victoria, which is the southernmost state on the mainland, to North Queensland and Cape York. But on the west, there are different mountain ranges, but not to the extent of a mountain range that goes the whole length of the continent from
So
north to
then,
south.
so then, is it safe to assume that historically, those major obstacles would also dictate the differences between the mobs throughout the continent?
Yeah, so um, on for where our people are on the west, there's a gigantic regional block of people that are we're Radri and Gamarai. So we go from, say, to try to visualize it in your mind, if you would go from, say, if you go from Detroit all the way up to Quebec, that's, or into, yeah, towards Quebec. That's the extent of the boundaries of two First Nations. But there's a whole group of about 10 blocked together that have a similar language. Whereas when you get over into the Blue Mountains or the mountains and then go to the east, the languages are totally different. So yeah, you're right that there is a big geographical difference in blocks of cultural groups. Like for instance, Anishinaabe, you got Anishinaabe people, you have three fires, then you've got is it Six Nations? So you got all these blocks of different people um, that have a lot of similarity and commonality in language, culture, belief, and something that binds them together. And that's the same for the people in the West.
Well, it's definitely evident that the powers that should not be have utilized the same plan or guidelines to, conquest of Australia and North America, South America. The empire's game was well strategically created.
Yeah, so what they did was they used people from one area who they were totally destroying and putting pressure on, and then made it very difficult for them. And then they said, we need your people to go and be scouts and be in the militia and be in the native police to go and hunt down other people. And if you don't do it, then we'll kill your family or your family will starve. So they used that divide and conquer. But with most Aboriginal people, there was the irrespective of where your people come from, there was a pretty much universal law where if I done something wrong to another people, then it was my people that would punish the individual. So I would be punished for doing something wrong to others, and the other people could come to us and say, you know, John done this, or Yibai Ngare done this, and they would hold me to account. So our traditional law, based on thousands upon thousands of years of sustainability and connection and kinship, actually was very strong, and it created peace and created a system of engagement that helped all people on the continent to survive and support each other. And that doesn't say that there wasn't conflict, but conflict was controlled, and there was a set of laws, rules, like you said. They say, there's a system in which deals with those things in a good way for the benefit and the healing of community and the country. Whereas the colonial invaders, like in Turtle Island, same as in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and other indigenous peoples all around the world, they tried to divide and conquer and push people against each other. And they're still doing it today.
You know, Nese, I've always said that they practiced on your people before they came to ours, because yous were before us, and they figured it all out how to quickly and cleanly conquer. Oh, look, sorry, he's back with us again this week. G'day, Merlin. How you going, old mate? Yeah, they practiced on your mob, and then they come here. They knew exactly what to do and what not to do, and they executed it pretty efficiently, I reckon. Unfortunately.
Yeah, I think the big difference though is when they came here. At first, they were like, "Well, let's see if we can negotiate it." That doesn't work. Let's just kill them. And then when they got to Australia, they're like, "Nah, let's just wipe them out. That'll work better."
Negotiations. Yeah.
It takes too long. Can't stop progress.
We got a series here called Australian Wars. Have you seen that, John? Australia Wars?
Yeah, I watched 2, but I didn't want to watch the 3rd because
I got halfway through the first one. I couldn't watch anymore.
because for non-Aboriginal people, it's a historical discovery, and they learn about things that they're challenged, emotionally challenged. But for us, it can re-traumatize. So you watch it and you just don't want to watch anymore because you deal with it 24/7. You deal with the impacts of what happened in the past because as the saying goes, you can history is, we live our history. History is not in the past, it's in the present. I can't remember the saying, but
this is where I'm having as much as I am enjoying the new TV series Reservation Dogs, I am starting to have a little bit of a challenge with it because they're making light of how horrific reservation life is. Of course, we can find joy, we can find laughter and giggles, but if you comparatively look at the reservations to the whole of the United States, there is a huge divide, just as they claim about the 1%, where it's flipped, where the reservations are the 1% and the rest of America is the 99%. And I do like this series because it is funny, especially from someone who does sit down comedy. I can appreciate the laughter of it, but is it another social conditioning of where we get complacent to the struggling of others? Because if we generalize in here, when we see somebody else suffering worse than ourselves, then we tend to feel better about ourselves.
Yeah, because that was my next question, was like, what can we offer? It's time to heal, and John mentioned it earlier about how we get re-traumatized. And just in a TV show like that, just for us to watch things, it brings up things like that because we're not running it. What things could we do in this today life and share with others and then people listening too? And we've got some people in the chat room as well. G'day, Polly. What can we share with them for healing? Like out of all the trauma that our peoples have suffered, we're still here, we're still surviving, we're shinier than we ever have been. What can we share with everyone listening for healing? I don't know how to explain it any better than that.
Well, I think it's as easy as witnessing a scratch on your arm healing. If you use that same process of the healing and bring it into fruition of your entire, as Anishinaabe, we say physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. And if you are wounded in any of those parts, then healing is needed for you to come to your normalcy or be able to find that positivity. So recognizing the wound is always a good place to start. And that's hard because then you have to take that critical perspective of your dominion of existence. And that's where we as Anishinaabe utilize what is called the vision quest, where we will sit for up to 4 days in one location to reflect on our existence and imagine the plans, the thoughts that you could come up with from an experience of 4 days to ponder, what's what.
And I agree, brother. And like the saying that what I was going to try to share was history's in the past, but the past lives within us. And the hurts that have happened to our grandmothers and great grandfathers and our elders and our ancestors, if we don't address them by that cultural way of healing, then the manifestations of that pain go from one generation to the next. And there's a study called epigenetics where they try to discover how genes change. So those with trauma, those with unaddressed trauma, when they have children, that those genes are passed on, and they change, and they will reflect that trauma. So, for instance, stolen generations, because our family stolen generations, and it's similar to residential school and boarding school survivors. It's the same thing. It's the same thing as Holocaust survivors. That trauma will manifest if it's not addressed. And when we look at the statistics of our people, and it's the same for Anishinaabe, because I listening to Nese and listening to other family over there in Turtle Island, it's the same thing. When we look at people say, well, what's wrong with us as Native people, as First People? Like, oh, we've got a lot of people in prison. We've got a lot of self-destruction. We've got a lot of suicide. That's all manifestations of what has happened to us, not what's wrong with us, but what has happened to us. And for us to change that, the strength of healing through our traditions and our culture is what helps with the deeper sickness. And that traditional base is what we need to move forward to heal. Because it just doesn't heal us, it heals our ancestors and it heals our children. And I learn all this from my my kinship in family with Anishinaabe, because when I went to Turtle Island, I went and sat with communities, and they were doing programs like the Gathering of Native Americans, which is an indigenous-based methodology, as a cultural, as a cultural way, as a cultural intervention on trauma, on intergenerational trauma, for us to heal ourselves with the strength of our ancestors' culture and way. And that's what I see makes a lot of change. And we've had our family come from Turtle Island to Australia and help us with our youth and help teach us that way of knowing and doing as a methodology. And we've contextualized it and adapted it to our way. And we've both learned from both sides in that exchange, and it's created a lot of healing. And it's reflecting on our ancestors' traditions and wisdom and connection to country and to the spirit world. So that's the path that I know is the right way for healing. And it doesn't just heal us as sovereign First Peoples. It heals, that methodology from the wisdom of our elders heals anyone, heals refugees. We have Syrian refugees. We have refugees from all around the world. We have those service personnel from war with trauma. It helps them heal them too. So it's a good path to share and to build connection and healing with all the community.
Well, pondering about the full spectrum of trauma, the other potential challenge that I see, pun intended, is that if the powers that should not be can convince us that we all have a genetic or ancestral trauma, then they could utilize that to continue to proclaim that we are still wards of the government here in North America, because the Native Americans, even though they're labeled at one spectrum sovereign entities, if you look at the laws, were considered wards or in trust. That the dominant society thought that because the Anishinaabe did not take advantage of all of the possibilities with the minerals that were abundant in Turtle Island, the resources, because we didn't take those resources and make an example of Europe, we were considered so inferior. And that was their reasoning, their justification, their excuse for taking our lands. And I don't mean lands within our possession, but that is another challenge of the machinations of the powers that should not be. At some moment, some individual said, "This is mine," and patted the ground and then planted a flag to validate that. "See, this is mine. I planted a flag. Ha ha. Do you have a flag?" And so the system that broke us apart after they scattered us into the winds came back and said, "Hey, we want you to utilize this system to manage your system." And this system that we created, the Constitution, government, the 3 branches of legislation in America, that was just like our government system, where we had the councils, and each council was utilized to make sure the other councils were staying honest. Democracy, the republic.
Self-management. I've got a question for you. In this day and age, and it's been increasing year after year, the populace, like I said before, are coming to the native people. In your opinion, What do you think they're coming for?
Well, I think, as Nese was talking about with regards to foreign people coming and saying, you're primitive, you're this, you're like a child because you haven't accessed the wealth of the land as far as, minerals and resources. And that perspective is like a little child telling an elder what to do. So a reckless little child telling an elder that has many years of wisdom and good living, and the little reckless child says, this is how it's got to be. So for our people who, as the Anishinaabe have been created to place, our people created to place, for how many thousands of years, they say, 100,000 years, so many thousands of years, our people lived in a sustainable way with the natural world, where there was a balance. Now, science hasn't been around for that long, mainstream science, and the nations of Europe haven't been around for that long. So they're the juniors. And see, we didn't dig up and create big scars in the land to make metal and to do this and to do that, because we've seen that the natural world is animate and there's reason, rhyme, and place for each thing. So we see that the elements in the ground are put there because it creates balance. And when you destroy the balance, you destroy your place as in that sustainable living. So a lot of people are coming to us now because they realize that mainstream society and the way we live today is not sustainable. It's just
Yeah,
not sustainable.
I actually don't like that word sustainable. I like what do I use? Perpetual giving.
Yeah, same way, it's
Because we lived tribally, everything was to maintain
balance.
nature for many generations. We weren't just thinking of our own selves, we're thinking of our children, our grandchildren, our great grandchildren, our great grandchildren, and what we're leaving behind for them. And you don't think like that. You think about your grandchildren just barely, if you're barely surviving.
Yeah.
Just before the show today, I was listening to Wookiefoot's latest album, Writing on the Wall. And there's a song in there where the lyric says, you can't starve your grandchildren to feed your kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a great lyric, Mark Murphy, my brother. I love you. But, this is the major challenge is that with this technology trying to mimic a natural system, the balance isn't found, especially since the powers that should not be utilizing the banks and the corporations don't realize or don't care about the impact of their creating this product or that product is having on the earth. Especially, of course, I'm going to get into that rant about cannabis and how cannabis could have replaced everything that's made from petrochemicals with a hardness that can almost match steel. And so it's just so frustrating when you look at these individuals that have made this choice to be like, yeah, whatever. I am superior over all of these others. And it's not just specifically white men that are doing this. There are Anishinaabe on my own reservation. If the Department of Indian Affairs are there, please take a look at my own council and look at the corrupt occurrences that have been happening over the last 6 years, because there's major corruption going on my reservation, and it's heartbreaking. And sure a lot of people will have examples of where people of their own ethnicity are causing negativity on their own. It's happening with all races. And I do believe that a lot of it is just the whole continue to divide and conquer, because if they can divide us within our own people, then they're even more successful.
Actually, it's funny, we're all over the place tonight, but that's the point. You at least sit back and listen, and because you never know when something's going to pop up. But me and John were talking earlier tonight about something similar, Nese. And my question was, I was thinking about that, and the stuff in our own people, we have the same problems as you do. And I'm thinking, it's a time for healing, right? It's not a time for, and I want to clarify again for everyone listening, when we say white fellas, we're not talking about the colour of your skin, we're talking about the way of thinking, because there's a certain way of thinking that goes against the natural law, and a lot of people realise that, and we're talking about that way of thinking, that system of thinking. And back to where I was. Where was I, guys? Before I had to clarify that. How do we start this healing process while we've got people of our own mobs having this way of thinking going against us? Like, how do we deal with this? Do we just march on and be an example of healing, or do we address these people? Like,
I think you got to understand the sickness. So, I think was Polly. Is it Polly one? Polly
yeah,
one?
Brother Polly, yeah.
So he made a good comment in the chat about it being a virus, like the trauma and the sickness being a virus, and also listening to what Nese was saying about acknowledgement. So, we've got to understand and acknowledge what the sickness is, and the powers that should not be, that darkness, that's speaking into all. It's whispering, that shadow's whispering and getting into our all of our people. It doesn't matter, all human beings. One race is a human race. So, that in every culture you've got good, bad, and everything in between. So that those evil powers, they create the spiritual sickness. There is a virus that is a spiritual virus. So those people that think they're so superior, the big globalist, trillionaire, billionaire, elite, so-called elites, they're actually the sickest people on the planet, because they are so sick in their spirit. They think that material, the accumulation of material wealth, and the vision of the world from their lens as what they want to see through, so that they can control it. They actually think that that is the right path, but that's actually the darkness speaking into them, so it can create more sickness to feed the shadow beings. So the strength of indigenous culture is that we have a lens that recognizes the deeper sickness and understands those beings are a virus, that we need to address the deeper sickness, not just the outside symptoms, the manifestations of the infection or the virus, but the true deeper sickness. And it also shows you that we are closer to each other as human beings, than what we're made to believe, because as human beings, these things affect everyone.
Yeah, they do. Like you said before, there's no boundaries in spirit world. And these things affect everyone. That's why it's time for healing, because we need to heal up quick, and get strong against these black beans. Black beans, because they're everywhere. And I don't know what's happened, but it feels like someone released a whole lot of them in the last few weeks.
And talking about black beans, I mean, again, like, you look at the black bean source. what the black bean sauce has done around the world. You know, the black bean sauce, to use a metaphor, we were talking earlier, Luna, about before we got on the show about how many people we lost because of this black bean sauce.
Yep.
So many of our people forgot about the history of the poison blankets and the poison food, and now we're getting this poison, this poison medicine, and the death rate in our communities is just was already high, and now it's just gone skyrocketing.
My reservation, 20 years ago, there was around 28,000 enrollees. This last spring, they said there's only 19,000 enrollees. And this is part of the challenge with our Indigenous heritage, because we are literally fornicating under consensual knowledge ourselves out of existence. And it sounds ethnocentric to be, as an Anishinaabe, I need to procreate with another Anishinaabe because we're disappearing, because they have this thing called blood quantum. And this goes back to the beginning of the conversation about our culture. What is a culture? They have literally in the books the guidelines to what a culture is. That's their own language, their own land, their own social guidelines. And then I think the other one is a system of commerce, trade. And unfortunately, I believe there's a strong argument to proclaim that we as Anishinaabe may not be Anishinaabe anymore. And this is one of the reasons why I do ritual and ceremonies, why I do my fasting, and as a pipe carrier, excuse me if this is hubris or ego, but as a pipe carrier and an eagle bone whistle carrier, and having been presented eagle feathers, I have an obligation for the people, because my pipe is not for me. It is not my pipe technically, but I carry it for the people to utilize, maintaining these rituals, these ceremonies in homage to my ancestry. Because who knows, maybe those extraterrestrial relatives, when they come back and they say, hey, what happened to all of the indigenous people? What happened to all the paleo world people? Where are they? And then they're like, well, you guys wiped all of them out. You definitely got it wrong again. And then they're going to metaphorically shake our worldly snow globe and see what happens then.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, we don't go by blood quantities, do we, John?
No, we don't. And
Can you explain to listeners how we're different that way? And I know they say that in your own people you don't do that, but that's what's been placed upon you.
well, I'll just because I just there were one Polynesian your brother, you made a comment about we've got more in common than we have that is different, and also they say as you said, the paleo people, like all around the planet we had indigenous peoples. Look at and my bloodlines also have Irish, and Scottish, and those people were very much like Aboriginal people, and what's happened to their traditions? It's become turned into a fairy tale. There's people in Europe, the Sami people, there's all these peoples that had a similar connection to the earth and to each other in kinship and connection, which, bound us, as living beings, and that's been destroyed, and We're trying to hold on to that. So with our identity, when the British come, they realized that the manifest destiny which they suggested was going to wipe us all out didn't actually wipe us all out. So it's a similar for Anishinaabe. And as human beings, because there is, as one Polynesian mentioned, there is more in common between us than there is difference. So those people like the Irish are similar to the Métis in Turtle Island, like they married into Aboriginal people. But for us, we didn't see that there's a difference because you can't have, they're human being as well. They're human beings. So the difference is in culture. So the culture wasn't in any way watered down. It was just actually um, magnified. So we still had our traditional culture of Aboriginal law, but we also had this new law of people that come. And we incorporated in a balance to be able to shapeshift between one and the other. But mainstream and colonial way said, oh, because you've mixed in with an Irishman and your children have a little bit fairer skin, then you are not a full-blooded Aboriginal, you are a half-caste. But our people said, no, that's not the way we see it. His mother is Aboriginal, so he's Dordem, but we say Dinga in our language, using Anishinaabe Moen, Dordem, we say Dinga, and that means you descend from from your mother, and your totem is this. So I'm Ibai Ngarai Dinga Ngai. I'm a we're the snake people, come from our mother. So our worldview didn't come into this sense of you're half this or half that, or quarter this or quarter that. You're a human being, and your culture determines how you identify. Whereas in Australia, the colonial government, because we had mixed heritage, tried to put us in little boxes because they wanted to progress our physical characteristics toward European characteristics, which was specifically the epitome of the best was um, the British Empire, upper class British, and they seen that anybody who's not equal to that is lower than them. So they tried to make us to be second class. Again, I'm not making generalizations. White people, they tried to transform the black into white because the black, everything native or indigenous was deemed as primitive, and they were epitome of what civilization was. So we had these laws called the Aboriginal Protection Act that were pushed upon Aboriginal people in every state and territory, where we were separated by what they deemed as caste. I know, who was fairer and darker, but for us, genetics is very diverse. So within the same family, we could have someone who's dark, someone who's in the middle. But they just said, all right, you're dark, so you go into this pile. But they even forgot that in summer we get darker. So in winter you're a quarter caste, quadroon, and then in summer you're a half caste because you're darker. So that's how ridiculous this system was. And then they tried to apply that system to control us and control the kinship and the sovereign way that we see each other in kinship. And that's why the caste system didn't work in Australia. But then again, if they had have used materialism and commodities to reward those who were fairer, it might have worked. But it didn't work because we were all treated as primitive. We were all treated with the same disdain as savages, whether we're fairer or lighter. They would say, "Oh, he's got a touch of the tar brush. He's an abo. He's native." So it didn't matter. You were still, irrespective of your blood quantum, you were still a savage. And our kinship system was so strong that the blood quantum rules which they tried to apply on us, it didn't work. And like in Turtle Island, like when I visited Bay Mills in their country, um, they have a similar way of doing business as us. So they don't have a caste system there. They have it identified through similar in our way as your 310. It should just descend from your ancestors, from your first people ancestors, us as Aboriginal, we identify and we are accepted by our community. And that is what defines us as, well, they say Aboriginal, I say Murri, or Nishnabé. So that if you're Nishnabé, then that's who you are. And see, the constant drive of mainstream colonial psyche in our country is to divide us and break us away from the connections of kinship of our ancestors that calls and defines us to be human beings. So the same pressure is facing us, they say, on our identity. And yes, we are coming further and further away from the strength of the pillars of identity that our ancestors gave us. So yeah, it is contentious, and we've got to stand for the wisdom of our elders and try to fight the good fight.
Well, speak for yourself about standing, but first I have to proclaim how much I appreciate you, especially with your revealing your Irish descendants, because yeah, well, we know, and I say that totally in jest, because I'm sure I got a speckle of Irish or Scottish in me somewhere here in North America, especially if you look at the early uh, uh, frontier men. A lot of them were Scottish and Irish and French. But I wanted to go back to where you were talking about the Métis. This was one of the beautiful strategies of the powers that should not be, the dominant society, because of our clan system, as John said, our totem or our Nindundane, that was dictated by your mother. So when the Anishinaabe males would procreate with the European females, they were arguing, or the conflict was made, the challenge was made, that what clan do they come from? And this is where the Métis came from, or the Métis, as some people say. And so that created its own identity beyond the clan system, and also went to that aspect of, are they white, are they red? And interesting enough, historically, the Dawes Act, where they said, okay, we need to determine who are the full-bloods and who are the half-bloods. And so they rounded up all the Native American, the Anishinaabe, and they created a scientific tool to measure your full-bloodedness and half-bloodedness. And after all of this scientific research and scientific studies, they came up with this tool to where they got everybody in line, and you came up to a table, and they would take this tool to check your authenticity of blood quantum. And the tool was a paper clip that was straightened out, and they would scratch the top of your hand. And if your scratch was redder than your skin, you were a half-breed. And that changed your blood quantum. Ironically enough, within the Dawes Act, there was the feasibility, the possibility of, if you were a half-breed, then you could sell your allotment, your land that you were given on the reservations. And so it was more or less just another land grab by the powers that should not be, to take our land from us even more so. Because it was interesting enough how many people all of a sudden became half-breeds, especially those that were on land that had the resources. In northern Minnesota, look at where all of the iron ore has been dug out. And historically, people don't realize that in the state of Minnesota, that we had in symbiotic relationships with the Boan people, the Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota. They were in Minnesota because Minnesota was more or less all woodland territory. And the Boan people lived right on the edge of the woodland into the woodland. During the summer, they would go to the prairies where they would hunt the bison. And then we had the woodland bison too. And the powers that should not be said, hey, we have found through those frontiersmen that have gone throughout and did our bidding, they found iron ore in northern Minnesota. And so a deal was made with the Anishinaabe. Unbeknownst to us, they had other alternative plans. And they said, hey, if you push out the Lakota, Dakota, Nakota people out of Minnesota, we will then move all of the Anishinaabe to the state of Minnesota where you guys all can live in harmony. But that was just the precursor to the more land grab, to where we and the Boan people massacred each other. Eventually, the Anishinaabe pushed the Lakota, Dakota, Nakota out of Minnesota into their territory, North Dakota, South Dakota. And then they proceeded to take the land from us, all in the vein of taking the Red River Valley, which had the greatest source of soil for farming, and also the timber rights, and then the iron ore and the heavy metal resources. So historically, the plans of manifestation was well calculated, well articulated, and very, very beneficial to those that started the plan. And then if you look historically through, unfortunately, certain bloodlines, certain family names, you find that they were a huge influence on the strategic manifestation or manifest destiny.
You know, listening to you fellas talk about what you're just talking about, I'm looking at today, and if you read the news and all that, look at the news, which I don't really, but I know what's going on. That's what they want to do to the main populace, is take their land, which is their house and all that. They want to do the same thing. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, here in North America we have intimate domain. You know, where the governments can all of a sudden decide that, hey, you're not using the land for its full potential, and for the community, for the city, for the government structure, we need to take your land so we can develop it for the, yeah. Oh.
Because what are they? What's that thing? You own nothing and be happy.
Oh yes. What's his name? Schwab.
Yeah, I heard someone say
you will have nothing and like it.
Yeah.
Or enjoy it, something like that.
Obviously, he's not First Nation or Indigenous or Paleo. I can tell you that because we know what that's like.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, John. Like, we already know what it's like, and this is why I think it's so important that we get together and have yarns and let people listen, because we have been through all this. We see what's going on, but we're young enough. Unfortunately the wounds are fresh enough for us to say, look, we're healing, and we have these ways that will heal everybody if we can get to that point. But it depends what they're going to do next, their next move.
Well, you know, we are healing and we are strong. And what I will say is this: like, I work at a university and I work in the faculty of medicine, and this is controversial, so I'll be careful how I speak about it. But the black bean juice, everybody had to get the black bean juice, right? And these medical students were told if they don't get the black bean juice, then they have to leave the university. They can no longer study. So they not only had to get the two glasses of black bean juice, but now having to get a booster of black bean juice. And the students talk to me and say, you know, oh, we don't really want it. We don't want it to get it because I had this sickness and I've had this reaction. And then I said to them, right, let's talk about Indigenous history and recent history. Now, in the last, in the last 20 years, actually in the last 15 years, the government manipulated and suspended the Racial Discrimination Act, which is a federal act, so it can actually change the legislation to stop Aboriginal people from putting a veto on mining companies to explore on their companies. And the excuse they used was there was an epidemic of sexual abuse in the Northern Territory on Aboriginal reserves. So that actual accusation came from Aboriginal Affairs. That's like the Bureau of Indian Affairs, come from Aboriginal Affairs. And then the Prime Minister of the time, John Howard, said, "Oh, we're gonna intervene in the Northern Territory because these native people are sexual deviants in the Northern Territory, and there's an epidemic of sexual abuse." So they suspended the Racial Discrimination Act. They marched the military in and imposed all these rules, changed legislation of the hard-won rights of our Aboriginal people to have veto rights and to stop people from coming mining on our country. And that was a breach of human rights. And see, in the past, nobody said anything. It was never heard in mainstream Australia, and if it was in mainstream media, not many people really said anything. It really was a hiccup for mainstream Australia. But once the investigation was done, they found that there was no sexual abuse epidemic in Aboriginal communities, and that the sexual abuse come from minors who'd come onto communities. And the other issue was teenagers not knowing and being aware of sexual health. That's what the issues were related to. But it was a great excuse to establish an intervention to create a crisis to throw the rules out the window. So what has happened now is I shared these stories with the students and say, hey, do you know that there was an intervention? Do you know what the Prime Minister suspended the Racial Discrimination Act? Do you know the Prime Minister created and seeded chaos and created a crisis so that they could change legislation that protected the human rights of your Indigenous brothers and sisters in this country? And they go, no, we didn't know that. I said, well, now you know what it's like to be Aboriginal, because you've had laws changed and a crisis has been created, and now your own bodily autonomy is taken away from you. And if you want to maintain your status as a medical student or practice as a doctor, you got to drink the black bean juice. And all of a sudden, the wisdom of our history, the resilience and strength which we are marching through, is relevant to them. And we've got some lessons to teach them. So the strength of what we've experienced, and for instance, Anishinaabe, since for nearly 500 years, that wisdom and knowledge of resilience and strength of our people, of the Anishinaabe people, of our Aboriginal people, of the Paleo people, that strength is very relevant today, because those lessons are important for mainstream society to learn about the shenanigans and the evil ways of doing business that, as Nese says, the powers that should not be wheel and deal.
Yeah. And how can I put it? Before, those powers that should not be embodied themselves in certain people. In our cultures, we were taught about bad spirits and stuff like that, and how to combat them. It was in our culture, you know, you do certain things and it's to keep the light and keep these things away. Do you think those things would help people today, those kind of cleansings and that? Because virtually what we're dealing with today are those things embodied in people, like you said before. They're in people and they're doing things they shouldn't be. And there's also ones that aren't in people that go and harass people. Do you think any kind of our cultural practice, like cleansing even, or just connecting or anything like that, would help people in that situation that we're in? Did I not explain that right?
I say, but yeah, the power of that light, that spiritual light in the ceremonies, like Nese was saying, he's a pipe carrier. He has the power to create and use that light and healing in community to manifest reality in a good way. Because of that, you know, I've been involved in pipe ceremonies and the healing power of the pipe ceremony. I've seen the power of our traditions and our culture to actually manipulate reality to create that light and bring that light to actually drive away and consume that darkness. And that's the strength of our power of our culture. The technology of our culture is a spiritual technology. And you know, Schwab and all these other mob, they don't even understand it. You know, but it's powerful. It can make change. You know, but that's where there's you know, we've got to come in solidarity, because like yarning now, talking now, because we're so isolated because we've been fighting the fight, and we haven't been connected. You know, but the more we connect, the more stronger we become.
Yeah.
Well, that is one of the beautiful possibilities in this technological advanced stage we are in. We have the ability to have communication around the world. And that is where we are going to overcome these challenges, is through healthy communication. And I proclaim that our truth usually lies between us. You know, so are we willing or able to let our egos, you know, go to the wayside as we have healthy dialogue? And through that healthy dialogue, we can unify each other, because we get many perspectives of the challenge. And it goes back to, you know, the teachings of my ancestors, that the circle is the like ultimate teacher. By utilizing and I call it spherical enlightenment, because the circle is a two-dimensional representation of the sphere, which is the three-dimensional. And if we look at the circle and its parameter with a dot in the center being the challenge that we are observing, then we go around the perimeter so we can check out the different perspectives of the challenge to make a better, well-informed decision moving forward. However, this process doesn't happen instantaneously. And so it takes discussion and it takes conversation to find an agreement for all. And this was a major challenge to the powers that should not be, the corporations and the banks, because they did not want this slow process of making a good generalized decision to interfere with their ability of creating more money or more power, where they went hand in hand. And so they had to disrupt the system of the councils. They had to disrupt the circle. And if you think this strange, look at a clock. And this gets into the iconography and the symbolism of the metaphor of magic with a K, magic with a C, and prestidigitation. If you look at the face of a clock, more times than not, you will see a square with a circle inside it. And this is very important in symbolism. Instead of looking at the fullness of it, of the circle, square, then square, circle, square, circle, going within the microcosm, and the macrocosm, where the square is enclosed by a circle, enclosed by a square. And this is along with our teachings, and it starts going into sacred geometry, and it also explains a magic. And as John was saying earlier, doing these rituals and these ceremonies, I have experienced things that I cannot use my square teaching, my dominant society teaching, in explaining what I just observed, because it lies on the realm of semantics, metaphysical, paranormal, supernatural, and that is hard for some individuals to scrutinize. And when it came to the church, when they first met my ancestors, right away they were proclaiming that we were in league with the devil, that we were heathens, because these priests would send back letters and say, hey, I just witnessed this and I can't wrap my mind around it. And I'll share one of the stories that I found. So a priest came to a entity that was known to perform magic, had tools or abilities of what some would label a medicine man. And I'm not a fan of that term, but for $19.99, I will be your many sins man. But this priest went to this elder and said, hey, prove to me your powers. And at first, the elder was like, no. And eventually he gave in and said, okay. So what they did is they built a wigwam or a wigwam. And a wigwam is basically a dome structure. They made two of them exactly the same with no entrance or exit. And all it had was a hole in it. And then they bounded the entity up in a blanket and then wrapped him around with the rope. And then they put him in the lake so he could be on his knees and above water. And then they put the dome over him. And then they fed in the hole a rope. And they brought the rope along the shore on the sand. And then they had another wigwam that was stationary right there. And then they put the other end of the rope into that hole. And I'm paraphrasing what was written down by this priest. And he said that the elder started singing. And eventually the song he started singing was harmonized by other voices. As it occurred and got louder, the rope became tight. And then the rope would go back and forth a certain amount of length. And this continued on. And then all of a sudden, from the wigwam on the shore, a voice would be heard. And then, as one voice would not be heard from the wigwam in the water, it would then be heard in the wigwam on the shore. After all of the voices were gone from the wigwam in the water, all of the voices were heard in the wigwam on the shore. The rope went slack, and then one by one, the voices disappeared to where it was just one voice of the elder. He then said, "Okay, uncover me." And they uncovered him. And allegedly, from the writings of this priest, of this Jesuit, I think it was, he said that not only was the elder in the wigwam on the shore, but he was dry. The blanket was dry, folded up with the rope coiled perfectly, like, again, the square and the circle. And the priest could not wrap his mind around how this occurred, how this feat was accomplished. And this is where John was talking about our ancestry had these abilities that are beyond our comprehension of today, but it does help in that romanticism of the Paleo American, And again, for only $19.99, I will be your many sins man and teach you of the ways of our ancestors.
For 1999, I'll get John to explain the significance of circles in our mob. I love that saying, Nese. It says so much, 1999. But it's inflation, and it's got to be 21.99. Anyway, back to what we're saying. You mentioned circles, and I put up on the screen one of our a painting in our traditional dot paintings. And I'll let John explain what it is. But before you do that, John, can you explain the significance of circles? Because as usual, Nese, I know, as people know, you can't see, but every time I put something up on screen, you always talk about something to do with it, like you can see the picture, and I know you can't. So that tells you how sharp Nese's gifts are. So yeah, John, can you explain significance of circles and explain the picture that's up there?
So the circle is pretty much, as people connected to the earth, created to place. The circle is it's in much the way it's the same as Anishinaabe. The circle is comes from the natural world. It's a strength, and for our people, we see everything's in a circle. All living things are in a circle. Everything has a place in the circle, and we sit and speak in the circle. We sit and eat in the circle. We dance in the circle. Our ceremonial grounds are a circle. Our families are a circle. So everything's a circle. And the cycles of seasons are in a circle. So everything's in a circle. So we're circular people. We're not, and that circle says everything has its place. Whereas in a Western way and other cultures, it's about the square. It's about the hierarchy, and it puts people in its place, and it is used that hierarchy in that square, and that ladder is about control, like feudalism. I mean, our democracies are like feudalism now. They've been from the original source of, as Nese says, the Paleo people. And as I understand, Nese, you can correct me. Like the very sense of democracy in the United States comes from the wisdom of first people, of Paleo Americans. The sense of um, the United States, of many states coming together to be one. I mean, that's taken from first people, and it's the same here. It's the same in Australia. So the circle is really important. It's about the connection and the sense that everybody has a place, and not everyone. It's not about I'm better than you. That there's a hierarchy of importance of people from the top and the bottom, and you're not equal. We're not like that. So the painting that you got in front of you on the screen, they say it's an emu. It's literally an emu, and it's an emu which is sitting over a nest. And then there's emu tracks, bird like the emu foot tracks around it. And then there's a circle, which is the nest, and um, then there's little circles, yellow circles, which is the flower of the gidgir, which is like an acacia. And those little flowers are painted inside the emu's body as well, because that particular painting talks about the cycle of when you collect emu eggs, when you can hunt the male bird, when you can hunt the female bird, the cycling of the seasons, of when the rain comes and when the flower of the gidgir comes out. It's an indicator to say you can collect emu eggs. And then there's a time when it'll say you can't collect emu eggs. There's a time you can hunt the female. She lays the eggs, but the male looks after the baby. So that story talks about the night. Also talks about the night sky, because the images are in blues and dark blues and black, because in the night sky is the Milky Way, and one of the night sky features is they call it the coal sack. I don't know if you see that in the northern sky, but in the southern sky it's called the coal sack, and that is where we see the emu, um, and that is the way we see um, its turning of the seasons, because the celestial night sky will change, and the earth and the sky mirror each other. So those stories are there to teach our people how to live in balance, to only take what you need, and to respect our relation, which is a totem or a totem. Dinga, for us, is a big important totem, which is also a keystone species. So we've got to respect our family, respect our totems, because they're our family, and um, they will look after us if we look after them. And it also teaches us how to burn country. So when we burn the country with cool fires, do that fire management. The food is there for the emus, and we protect the longer certain areas around wetlands and certain areas of long grass, so that the emus can nest, and we protect it using fire for burning around it, so they have long grass to protect their babies. So that art reflects our connection to country and our kinship with the natural world, because we're in a part of that circle. We're not above nature. There is no sense of division between nature and people. Um, and that in the night sky, that coal sack is called Gaurke. That's the emu in the sky, and the emu in the sky also lives in the river on the land too. So that's that story. So essentially, it's an emu with a circle, that's done in blues, and the yellow flowers, which are little circles, and that all connects the stories of how to live in a good way.
And John, as Nese was talking about the spiritual stuff and not being able to translate to other people what it's about. What have you got to say about that? And do you have anything yourself, like any personal experiences to do with spirits or anything like that that you'd like to share with us?
What do you mean, like like translate the spirit understanding of the spirit?
Well, you know, for in our culture, we go and do stuff and we do spiritual work. And as Nese said, we don't really talk about what happens there because just trying to explain it to someone is really awkward unless they know what you're talking about. Because in our culture, we have strict laws around that stuff.
Yeah,
You know, yeah.
I think the only way I can explain it to them is try to understand where they're coming from. So, like if I'm talking to someone whose faith or belief is Christian or Muslim, I'll try to use, wisdom and metaphors from their understanding of the world. But for us, it's so different. I mean, it's closer to Harry Potter.
Yeah, that does.
They think Harry Potter's a fairy tale, but that come from our cultures. The reality of our cultures.
Well, it's funny when people joke about the Indian doing the medicine or doing the rain dance, and I thought it was funny too until all of a sudden you witness it happening, and it's like, oh, well, that's why they make these proclamations that Indians doing rain dances to manipulate the weather.
And you know what they say? Our ancestors are rainmakers too, and our people are rainmakers too, and that's still living today. And we can use our spiritual power to call in the clouds, to change the it's really hard to explain, but to change the reality through the spiritual realm. Whereas what they do, and this is what's been happening in Australia, is they send planes up into higher altitudes of the sky, and they spray chemtrails to make rain, to manipulate the weather. So this is how they do it. This is how the powers that should not be do it, as you say, and we do it with our spiritual strength, and that's the thing that they're most scared of, because if we wanted to, if we wanted to fight back in the same way that they fight back, there's no security guard, there's no army, there's no physical power on earth that can stop our spiritual attack on them if we wanted to actually cause harm. But that's not in the nature of the balance of the power in which we learn and use that. The only time you can use that power to actually create a negative is if it's justified, and it takes a lot to be justified, and that the great creator sets it so that the balance is kept. It's not a punishment, it's not an attack, it's about keeping the balance. And see, they in Australia, our what we call clever people, medicine people, we call Wirringan in our language, they could kill someone through song and spiritual ways, but they only do that because there's the spiritual power and balance is allowing that to happen. And not for any other reason. Whereas if if the mainstream mob could put a patent on the powers of our ancestors, they'd do it and use it to knock off everybody they could, so that they could make more money. But we don't operate that way. But I know that the power of our ancestors. If someone does something very, very wrong and it's deemed that someone's got to pay for it, nothing in the world's going to protect them.
Hey, we could start a secret society.
And for $19.99, you could join.
Well, here it's $19.95 because of the system. But the thing is, the people that charge $19.99 or $19.95, they'll never reach the power which those old people and those people who we call Wirringen can, the Murray doctors, the healers, and the nungaries, as Wayne is like a nungary. So they can never achieve that because they got too much, the darkness in them. The black beans. They've been eating too many black beans.
Yeah.
Well, that brings me to an interesting thought, and it kind of brings us back around about monetary value, where we have this fiat currency. One of the true gifts of the powers that should not be is to convince us that nothing is worth something and something is worth nothing, i.e. the human existence not having any value to it anymore, but a piece of paper, all of a sudden, because something's printed on it, has value. So with the situation that we find ourselves in today, when we have these individuals that can utilize their gifts, their talents, their tools of healing, well, assistive healing and of divination, that a compensation would be a equivalent exchange. And is it wrong? Whereas now in this system that we find ourselves in, that this piece of paper does have a value to it, because our moments are precious. There is no now except in the word, because the minute you say now, it's gone already. So now there goes another one. And at some moment of all of this cycle, somebody said, okay, Bejik, Nij, Nisui, Niswa, Nanan, Ingoldwaswe, Nijwaswe, Nishwaswe, Jangaswe, Midana, Ashi Bejik. So counting 1, 2, 3, and counting beans, and then counting bushels, and counting fields to where they had a value, and so working that field, so working that business. How do they get rewarded for what they are doing, their talents, their gifts? How does that blacksmith get rewarded for hammering out the situation? And how does the owner of the blacksmith company compensate? So they started counting tick, tock, tock, tick. Isn't it really slick how they created that prison of time? And so I go to my question. These individuals that have these tools, these gifts, whether they be called clever man or a medicine man or woman, that they should be given compensation. But how is that attained when there's that cliche money is the root of all evil. So can that dollar bill, that shekel, that ruble actually be utilized in that trade of services? Or are we going back to where, minimally, if you address one of these individuals to help you in healing or help you in divination, I would strongly suggest that you go and assist them, however, wash their clothes, scrub their floors, wash their dishes, grocery shop, chop wood, because it goes back to that equivalent exchange. And so would it not be okay to give somebody a few dollar bills?
Yeah, me and John were actually talking about that earlier, equal exchange of energy, whether it's dollars, food, like you said, cleaning up the yard, a blanket, anything like that, equal exchange of energy. And if you haven't got anything to give and you only got money, give them money. But a humble amount, like there's people out there that are ridiculous overboard. Instead of 1995, it's 995. And watch out, you got to be able to understand where they're coming from. I'll tell you something, they say when the first Native American man I met was he was grandfather Sunrise, his name was, and he, as I grew up, because I met him when I was young, as I grew up, he told me on the phone to be careful of spiritual people, and he kind of framed and outlined characters and told me that they'd charge lots of money and take people up the wrong path. And he also said it was his people, like just people in general, that are known for spiritual stuff, because you've got guru people, you've got Aboriginal people, even in our country. We've got some fellas that get up there and they don't really know what they're talking about, but they making money out of it. So yeah, he warned me about that when I was very young, so I was lucky to look out for the classic 1995. Me and John were talking about that earlier. You want to add to that, John? I think John stuck in.
I've got to correct you on Nese's behalf. Paleo Americans. Oh well, American. It's not even America, really, is it? Probably better to say something different. But I mean, that's not it. That's the name of someone else. But
Yeah.
just like Australia, it's not our name. But yeah, like there's plenty of people. There's a saying that says, "Those that know don't say, and those that say don't know." So there's a lot of people, especially here in our communities, that will peddle culture as a commodity because mainstream has appropriated it to deliver a sense of reconciliation, but the reconciliation really is based on very shallow way of thinking. And I'll give you an example. Like I work at the university, and the university they say, oh, we're on Darug land, we're on Watamatical people, this is their tribal land, and we like to invite them in to do welcome to country and pay them, $1,000. But you know what the funny thing is? They can't even get a free car park when they go there. That's on their land. They're welcoming all these people, the white people at the university to their land, but they can't even get a free car park from the university. So you know, it's really a joke, and it's a mental sickness. But you know, you got to be careful. Like the commodification, making money and making your culture an object for sale. There's a balance. Money is just digits on the computer that some bankster puts in there to fool everyone. You know, it's just a fool system. And the reality is what you said, Luna, is you give weight to that exchange and you show respect to give somebody something that is of worth. You know, like all the stuff that I learned as a young person, you know, and as I got older about my identity and culture from our elders, they never charged me any money.
Yeah, that's
So, you know, they did it because that's a part of their identity 24/7, not 9 to 5. And our culture is not built on materialism. Our culture is built on kinship, connection, and the circle, as Nese says. You know, it's built on that circle of balance, of love, of compassion, of connection, of that symbiosis of, you know, our existence is tied to each other through the great artist, which is brush strokes goes through everything. You know, the great
yeah,
painting which has been painted. You know, we're all part of that. We're brush strokes on that canvas of the great creator, and we're all bound in that image. So, you know, you can get paid for stuff, but as soon as you start making it about the money and letting the money grab you, you know, that's when you're lost. And our old people, like for me, right? Somebody that they want me to do a acknowledgement of the country, or they want me to do this and that. Like I got paid to do a talk. I said, give that money to someone else. Not that I don't need the money, but I don't let the money be my boss. And the other people that were there, I said, give it to the young fella because he needs that money more than me. So
yeah,
we're going to be a boss for it. Everything is a tool. You know, that's what I learned from when I went to Bay Mills. Um, you know, elders from Bay Mills sat and I heard, listened deeply to what they had to say. And they explained that, you know, the tribal councils using the tools at hand, you know, the tools of money, the tools of technology, but those tools they're using to try to benefit the people, and the hand that is using them is a hand that is guided by traditional values. And that was a really good learning experience.
yeah. That would have been. I'm still trying to get over there, but yeah, that would have been really good, John. So we're at 2.5 hours. How are you going, fellas? Like, are you had enough yet, or you want to go a little bit more?
I can roll with the flow.
What about you, John?
Yeah, when
You
Nathan's tired, I'll leave. When he's had enough, I'll go.
okay?
I can sleep in tomorrow, so I don't mind.
Oh, good. That's good to know. All right then. Um,
Oh, this is, I keep forgetting that this is Monday morning for the two of you.
yeah, it is. Yeah,
Or no, this is Sunday evening.
yeah. So yeah. So well, now it's Sunday morning because it's 1:18 in the
Oh,
morning. But like John, I don't have to get up and go anywhere, so I should be right. I'll just have bags under my eyes because I'm getting old. But I wanna get into a little. Since we're going to stay a bit longer. Um, Personal experiences with spiritual things. Um, and I'm not asking John to tell us any cultural secrets. I just want to know for your sake, like, have you been somewhere where a spirit's come out and challenged you, or you've been somewhere where you've actually seen spirit, because when I go to places, I see the ancestors and they show me visions of what it was like back in the day, and the whole area transforms, and they tell me the story of where I am. Or I'll go to another place and they'll feel I'm there, and I'll look around at the trees and all the ancestors will pop around and from out behind the trees and all wave at me as if to say hello. It's been a long time since someone that can see us has been there. Do you have any experiences like that, fellas? Like, one at a time. But any experiences like that?
You want to speak, Nese?
I was just taking a little drink of some Muckade Mushkiki Wabo, some coffee. Well, in the realm of spirituality or ritual ceremonies, one experience I'll share is I used to go to Lino Lakes for sweat lodge on Sundays, and individuals would come and pick me up, and we'd go out there. And during this particular lodge, while we were going through it, I think it was between the second and the third door, and a sweat lodge, more times than not, is broken up into like 4 stages. And between the second and the third stage, wow, the wind just started whipping outside. Got me a little, ooh. But during this sweat lodge, while I was there, I felt a presence behind me where at first I thought it was the individual next to me was kind of leaning back towards the wall and turning his head to the side and breathing heavy on my back. And then I'm just sitting there experiencing this. And at some point, I'm just like, that doesn't seem physically possible, or did it seem like the presence of a human? And so I lean back a little bit, just pondering, like, am I going to feel this person's head behind me? But I lean back a little bit, and right there is the wall of the wigwam. So I'm at a position of where somebody couldn't put their head behind me. And then I was just kind of like nervous. And in that nervousness, it like stopped. And so as the lodge continued and is done and everybody does what they need to do, we go inside and we have a feast or a meal. And while we're having the meal, the elder that usually runs the sweat lodge will start talking, and giving lessons, teachings, and people would ask questions. And this particular time, this individual looks at me and he goes, "Did you notice the bear behind you during lodge?" And it just, the goose flesh, the hairs stand up, and it was like this click where it's like, yeah, I did feel that, and he's like, "You're Bear Clan, huh?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I am Bear Clan." And these experiences are where my public school education and going to institution, university, where I'm like, how, why, what, because it is those questions that aren't answered unless you just say, okay, well, chalk it up to that realm of the supernatural, the paranormal, or do we just take it as the regular occurrence of Anishinaabe in their rituals, ceremonies, practices? Because one thing I do notice in the way that I exist within the cycle, I utilize the equinox and the solstice as points around the circle to do ritual and ceremony, where more likely I will fast for 7 days minimally. And when I do these rituals and ceremonies, as I start getting into that 4th, 5th, 6th day, the experience that I have of connecting to the greater cycles is readily attainable, just as they are nerve-wracking. Because when I synchronize with those greater cycles, it seems that my own abilities are synchronized also. And it's like fine tuning myself to where I start experiencing these strangeness, and an example of, that strangeness. The Paleo Australians, they talk about the bush telegraph. Well, I told my sister, Luna, give me a call this morning, make sure I'm up, and then I'll get prepared. Not literally 3 minutes, 2 minutes, I woke up, and next thing you know, I received my Skype call from Luna. And that to me is like an example of the Bush telegraph, the example of where me and Luna have had the fortune of connecting on a different realm of normalcy, even though technology is pretty remarkable in itself that we can connect like we connect. But there's an example.
Yeah, it works through technology. I've realised that. I tried it out. Well, what you don't know, Nese, is that John messaged me and said I'm in the studio here, right? And I'm like, okay, I'll be there. And then I said, I've got to ring Nese. So, and you said you got 3 minutes. So you woke up exactly at the same time that John entered the studio because he was the first one in there. So he was synced. We're all synced in. It was really cool. So Brother John, you got any stories for us about some of your encounters?
Well, I might tell one that might be, a bit relevant for Nese too, because, it just tells the connection. So, about probably would have been 2000 and I would say 10 years ago now. We went in. There was 5 of us Aboriginal people, um, and we travelled to Turtle Island on delegation to, 3 Fires Anishinaabe communities. And one of the communities we went to was Cape Croker. Do you know where Cape Croker is, Nese?
Yes, sorry. I was eating a banana while I'm listening to your story.
Yeah, it's it's on the border. I think it's on, is it Lake Michigan?
Yeah, isn't it right between Wisconsin and Michigan?
Yeah, it's on the border between Canada and US, and it's in Canada, and it's right on the lake. So what we did was, because we were talking about like fire management and community land management and cultural revival and all the programs we're doing here with the community, and we're doing cultural exchange to learn from community as well. So that Cape Croker was one of the communities we visited, and we had Bucko Teeple, Uncle Bucko, who was guiding us around the community, with Don Lyons, who's Leech Lake. He's a Bear Clan like yourself, a brother, and so Cape Croker and like all of the communities, like the same for here, they were very welcoming, and they said, yeah, come. So we had plenty of gifts to give community. We put up a travel and art exhibition. We sung, done some traditional stuff and some contemporary stuff, and we presented to communities. And anyway, we were traveling to Cape Croker, and they'd put us up in a it's like a cabin on the lake, and so 5 of us are driving along, and as soon as we passed this, we were driving at night. It was about 7 o'clock at night, and I'd never been there before. But as soon as we passed a certain place, I had this electric feeling all through my body, and all of a sudden I knew I shouldn't be in this place. And I said to Victor, who was in the front seat next to because Bucko was driving, and I said, I know Bucko wasn't driving, another person was driving. I said, I can't go to this place. And then Victor said, don't worry about him, he's just getting cold feet. I said, no, I can't go to this place, we've got to stop. I said, we've got to stop, and we've got to do the right thing before we go there. And they didn't know how to take me. And Victor just dismissed it because it was late at night and they wanted to get there. So we got to this place in the night, right on the river. And then they said to me, look, we will drop all the bags off. John, you get out and put all the bags in and get the fire going, find the electricity, and we were going to go back to we're all going back to get some food. So they left me there at this cabin on the lake, and they took off, and it was dark. So I just they left me with a torch. So I opened the cabin, and I started to take the bags in the cabin, and I was already feeling very uneasy. And then as soon as I walked into that cabin, I could feel this power and this energy telling me to get out. So I grabbed all the bags, about 6 of the bags, and I took them out of the cabin and put them on the step, and I wouldn't go back in. And then they come back, and they said, "Oh, how come you didn't go in there?" I said, "Brothers, there's spirits in this place. I told you before, I didn't feel at ease. I felt there was something that hasn't been done, or there's something wrong, and there's spiritual beings in that place." And they sort of brushed it off. And then when they went in and got the lights and sorted everything out, they were sort of very quiet. And then because we wanted to light up we needed wood to light up the fire in the fireplace. Everybody walked out and grabbed their torches to walk along the lake edge to get wood. And I thought, I'm not going anywhere. And then I called out to the spirits and I said, "Way!" And I announced who I was, and I said, "I asked permission to be here, and I'm sorry we come unannounced." and they all went collecting wood, and there was 3 Anishinaabe people, and then us Aboriginal people, and then they all come back like half an hour later with the wood, and they all sat in a circle around the fire, very, very quiet. And then Don and Oz Teeple, Uncle Bucko's nephew, said, "Did you see what I seen?" And they looked at each other and they said, "You mean all the shadow people walking around the lake?" So all these shadow people lived there, and that was a spiritual place of these beings. And then Bucko said, "Well, I'm going to do what I've got to do to make sure it's right." And then that night when I went to sleep, those beings come to me and said, "You didn't announce yourself when you come here. This is our place. Before you come to this place, you do the right thing." And then it all started to come in place, and there was a very powerful sense of presence of the shadow people that lived there. And at Cape Croker, there's also a bit like that. You know that is it the water lion, that like spirit that lives in the water? Nese? The
Well,
panda,
there's many
water panda.
different water entities that reside in the water, just as like on land.
Yeah,
And all these different entities have their own essence or spirit or spiritual body. So it's that finding respect for the fact of these other entities existing, whether they be of the water, of the earth, of the air, and that which is not seen.
yeah, because that spirit, that was a place there where that spirit resided. So you can feel the power of like all. See that when I was in the car, they was like dismissing what I had to say, but then later on, they really understood it, because that experience was a reality that everyone in that cabin felt. And that's when we talk about welcome to country in Australia, and about traditions of making people safe, because we understand, as as other First People and Paleo people around the world understand, that we are born to place, and we connect and we negotiate our space with other spiritual beings and other living things in any particular area. And that's very important to do that, because it keeps a balance. And when that balance is thrown out, there's sickness. And in one part of Cape Croker, there was a lot of sickness in the community. And I could feel and understand that there was a sense of unease, because the balance of the spiritual and the physical had been thrown out. And that power of those beings were causing, you know, causing harm, because there was unease amongst the people and the spiritual beings living in the same place.
And John, I don't really say much about stuff, but I was here in Australia wondering how my brother was going over there, and one particular day I got alerted, and all I knew is that I had to zip over there and stand next to my brother. And I had no idea about this story until he got home ages ago, or after, and he told me. And I never told you, John, that they alerted me and I come and stood next to you, because I'm thinking, what's going on? And then I didn't even know it was dark spirits. I just knew that upstairs alerted me, and I had to just stand with you. and I had no idea where you were, what you were doing, and I was wondering whether I was doing the right thing, because I knew you'd gone to another spiritual place, and I didn't know if you were doing ceremony. I didn't know anything like that. But being a good little person like I am, they said get there right now, and I did. And hearing the details of the story, I'm really glad I did that for you. Because all I knew was there was something there, and I had to just make the light stronger and move it away from you. That's all I had to do, and there was no questions asked. And as usual, they tell me later the details, and this is years later. I've had similar things too, even in my own place here in Australia, because I've left once before and went to another country, but it wasn't like that. It was just mainstream. There was no culture there that was spiritual like that. And so, but here at home, I've gone to places, and yeah, I've felt it, and it's like, no, don't go there. I'm not supposed to be here. I've accidentally been dropped off in places, and I've touched the ground and got hiccups, and straight away I knew I wasn't supposed to be there. And I forget the original story now, what I was going to say, because I was too busy listening to you, John, and I wanted to tell you that there was the telegraph going off again. Even though you were in another country, I still got the telegraph ringing saying, hey, there's stuff going on here spiritually. You need to have a look. So thanks for that story, John. You got more?
Well, other experiences, like, see, the thing is, you know, where we are here, like, no matter where you are, people talk about the supernatural or the paranormal, but it's seen as something that is entertaining. It's not a real thing that you deal with, like having to go to work and having to pay bills and pay the mortgage. It's not a real experience. But in all reality, when we didn't do the right thing before we went to that place to announce ourselves and negotiate a respectful, um, you know, a respectful arrival, those beings responded in a way which was real, which was physically powerful. And when you do things in the right way, it can also be positive and strong in a good way. Like like another place when we went to Pokagan community, Potawatomi people, and um, we went through the Sweat Lodge and we were welcomed by community, and we done a big giveaway, we done an art exhibition, and we presented to community, and we performed and sung and done all the good cultural things, and the elder of community taught us where we could go, where we couldn't go, what was where, you know. And that night when I slept, I heard the singing, like traditional singing. And the traditional singing, I seen the old people singing and their presence, and they were sharing songs with me. So, you know, there's times when it's very positive and you learn. And I heard those songs, and you know, connected to the spirits and ancestors of that place in a good way. So it's really important to understand that these paranormal, supernatural things, you know, it's not just something you watch on TV, but there's real implications that have physical and mental, um, you know, effects on people. You know, and that's why you see a lot of people committing suicide or getting really sick. You know, and also the other flip side is you see people very spiritually well and very spiritually strong because they're following the right path. So these spiritual things are normal. They're not paranormal. They're real everyday occurrences because we share this existence with other beings. So yeah, I learned a lot when I went to Turtle Island.
I remember what I was going to say now, John. When I went to the Elders Olympics, each year that we go, it was held at a different place. the first year that I went, we all got to where we were staying and that, and the next day was like, it's called a greet and meet, where all the mobs get together, all the elders from everywhere that are participating, and we all get to say g'day to each other before we commence the Olympic Games, and then we become opponents, right? Anyway, the first time I went, it was not till I think 2 days or 3 days before they did the welcome ceremony and the smoking, what John was talking about before. And the whole time I felt really uneasy. And after the smoking on the second or third day, I can't remember now because it was the first time, it was years ago, then I felt at ease after the smoking. And I remember going back to the hotel room and feeling not happy, because as a spiritual person, that should have happened the day we got there. Anyways, it was out of my control, and it was an event that was organised by other people, and we just went along and participated, so I didn't have much to control over it. So the next year that we went, I knew that the smoking ceremony wouldn't commence for a couple of days after we got here, and I did not want to sit in that uncomfortable energy of not being and announcing who I am and why we've come and all those things, what John said. So we got to our destination, and it was late at night, and me and the other lady, that we're the younger ones of the group, and we were kind of organising the aunties and getting them in their rooms and all that stuff. And we'd done all that, and it was about 10 o'clock at night, and it was just me and her there, and she was we were standing outside, and I said, come on, sister, we've got to go down to the water. And she said, why? I said, we've got to announce who we are and pay our respects before we do anything. I said, because I don't want to wait till Wednesday and feel out of sorts like last time. And as soon as I said that, she looked at me and went, okay. So we went down to the water, because we were right near the water, and this was water people's area that we were visiting. And I said what had to be said, and she said what she had to say, and we left it at that, and we went to bed. Well, the next morning we got up and we went and sat by the river, and all the aunties come to join us. And I thought it was a perfect time to sing a song after announcing who we are and all that, in respect for all the critters and spirits and all that live in the area and the ancestors. So I played my tape sticks and sang a song in honour of that, and the aunties enjoyed it. And in response, down the river comes a turtle floating, and it's swimming down to go to the ocean, and we're all like, wow. And it didn't stop there. Down the river comes a dolphin, and we're all like, wow. And then down the river comes another dolphin, and we're even like, more wow. And me and my sister, who was did the thing the night before, we just looked at each other and smiled, because we knew that if we hadn't have done that, we wouldn't have had that response the next day. And the most beautiful thing about it was that all the aunties got to witness it too, and it was like the place was welcoming us in return, and it was done the proper way, and it was all comfortable, and it was nice. So that was my example. And because we couldn't really do a smoking in a modern day hotel, like we do push the boundaries sometimes, like in hospital, if someone's dying, I've wheeled them out onto a balcony and we've lit a fire and smoked the person that's going to pass away, because it's a necessary thing, and we've broke the boundaries and told all the nurses to stay out. It's none of their business, but we don't do that very often, and I didn't want to do that at a hotel in someone else's country that I hadn't been before. So I did it the best way I knew how, and it was the right way, obviously, because the response back was a beautiful one, and everyone got to share it. And so, yeah, that's all I've got to say now.
What is the one bird that is in your background? I'm hearing.
Actually, that's not a bird, and I'm glad you can hear that. That is a possum. And when we first moved into this area 30 years ago, I hadn't realised that the possums, there's heaps of them here, right? That's the noise. And when they fight, they sound like something, like they sound like a dark one screaming.
Interesting. I heard that. I'm like, okay, I haven't heard that one before from your domicile.
Yeah, that's the midnight creatures coming out.
Is it raining there for one of you?
No, it's actually, we had a beautiful day here today. What about your end, John? Because John lives a bit further away from me.
Nah, no rain.
Interesting, because during the transmission of our communique, I've been hearing like some weird things where it's like, okay, name that sound.
I think that was a possum calling a mate. And then when the mate comes, if a male come along, it'd change the sound and it'd be more demonic. Is the only way I can describe it.
Well, back to the discussion earlier about John sharing his experience coming here to what we call it a key. That's the name for the ground, the earth, the territory, key. And we are currently attempting to bring Luna to America. And if anybody wants to assist in that endeavor financially, we welcome any donations to help cover the expenses to bring her here and let her go through that experience that John has. And of course, John, you're more than welcome to come with.
Yeah, by the way John laughed there, Nese, I was going to say, I think I better take him with you because that laugh was like, ha ha, she's not going to survive.
Depends if it's winter or not.
Oh, no, I wouldn't go in winter. I'd die straight away. That's so foolish. I showed him the photos on G'day Saturday when I went to visit Donnie. I was freezing. There's a picture. I'm sitting in front of the fire and I got my full snow gear and bike gear, pants on and everything, the warmest clothes I could find. And I'm still cold and everyone's all relaxed with their shoes off sitting in front of the fire and I'm the only cold one. So winter's out of the question.
Yep,
But
we had to just turn on our furnace here last week because it was getting down to the 40s. And we did have a couple flakes of snow.
ooh,
And I'm going to put it on the record that I called it 2 weeks ago.
you did. You've called a few things like that, Nate. You went in the wintertime, did you, John?
Yeah, it was at the end. Oh no, it was actually at the end of winter coming into spring, but um, because I'm not used to the cold, I got quite unwell with a bit of pneumonia, and so what happened was a mules. One of the community members brought me in some medicine, and I can't remember what it was, but it was made traditionally, and
some swamp tea.
I'm not sure, but they made it into a cream, and I tell you what, within 2 days I was better because I went to the tribal medical services, and they said, "Yeah, you got pneumonia, bro. Like, you got to go get this medication." But then one of the elders come up and said, "Here, take this," and gave me a jar and told me what to do with it. And I was quite frightened because I couldn't breathe properly. I thought, man, I'm a long way away from um, anything. But yeah, the old people there, they looked after me, and that medicine, that traditional medicine, man, I was back on my feet before I knew it. I was what was amazing, like within a period of 2 or 3 days.
So when I'll share another story of my experience. So because of my dis-ease that I proclaim, its causation is from the experimental jab that I got while in the military. And because of that having such havoc on my health, I looked into traditional medicines. And so when I had the opportunity to share space with an elder, I would ask for their suggestions. And there was a Native American, Paleo American that I met from the Vancouver area of Canada. That's the West Coast. And she shared with me a story about her auntie or cousin, I can't recall, was given a mushkiki. For a generalization in the English language, it's called medicine. And this medicine that she was given through vision, dream, aspirations, whatever today's term, they call it a download. And she utilized this medicine and she was, and this is the C word, curing cancer with this medicine. And she was having a large success rate. And at one point, she was told that if you give the secret of this to the medical industrial complex, it'll no longer work. And so for the longest time or shortest time, I don't know what the length was, she did not give her recipe away. And believe me, people tried to get it from her. And in the end, I don't know if it was the cousin or the aunt that took a sample of this substance and gave it to someone within the medical industrial complex. And almost instantly, there was no more success rates of this working for others. And this was one of the major challenges that with the dis-ease that was released upon the Anishinaabe, it was so quick that they didn't have the time to develop a remedy to take care of the current disease. You know, because for the longest time, they were quite aware of plant medicine to use for the usual or normal dis-ease that occurred throughout Anishinaabe land. And this is another, benefit, of the isolation or the segregation. Although I'm not a fan of it, forced segregation. I mean, it's a choice of those that want to. If all of the poo-poo heads wanted to go to one city, then let them all go to the same city, because then at least we know where all the poo-poo heads are. But with that communication with the dominant society, especially with the purposeful biological and biological systematic genocide that occurred in North America and South America, that it was too quick for the medicines to be made and the resources used to find an answer. Because one of the traditional ways that these elders, these individuals with special talents, would tap into what some people call the Akashic records or the knowledge of the ancestors and say, hey, right now we're dealing with this illness. What do we do for it? And individuals are given recipes of herbs, roots, leaves, twigs, whatever, to prepare a certain way to combat disease. And interesting enough, if you look historically, the pharmacopoeia increased thousands of percent when Europe came and found all of these different modalities of healing that the Paleo Americans had, and they were utilizing it. Unfortunately, it turned into the medical industrial complex where they're just utilizing it to profit, because there is no profit in the cure, and a patient cured is a customer lost.
Pardon me, if that's so true in today's world. We're starting to see some of our natural medicines come in. Did you hear about, it's up north, John, it's called Eugenics, and it's a mob up there. They got they're making herbal teas out of the plants. And there's one for sleeping, and they got different things here and there. And they're available online if you look up Eugenics. They're doing a good job. And I'm sure that if our traditional people probably would have come up with something like yours, Nese, if it hadn't swept them so quickly. What do you reckon, John?
Well, like the history of what happened with colonization and invasion in Turtle Island is similar for us. So I think in 17, I can't remember the date, but I don't know. You're probably aware, Nese, where it was Colonel Amherst released smallpox in blankets at Fort Detroit. I think it was during when there was was the British released smallpox, and I think it was the where the it was the I'm not sure the war, but it was when a lot of the Anishinaabe, as I understand, had allied with the French against the British, and um, it might have been, I'm not sure that exact date, but it was a letter that Amherst had written to back to Britain, saying that indicating that he'd released smallpox in blankets. They did that in Australia. In 1791, we got a smallpox pandemic. Oh, not pandemic, but epidemic, and it went from Sydney over the mountains up to the north coast, down the south coast, over the mountains, through the river country, all the way down to the next state. So these pathogens, on the first fleet, they had 3 vials, I think, or was it 2 vials in the manifest. So the first fleet never suffered from smallpox, but we copped it. So we copped that germ warfare, and they'd already learnt how to do it because they were fighting the Shnabe people and killing and trying to take their land and using germ warfare because they knew they couldn't beat uh, the people on the country because they were just too strong.
Well,
And yeah,
I've shared it before, I think, with Luna, that even prior to that occurrence, when the plagues were occurring in Europe, they were taking all of the dead plague bodies and putting them on ships to be decommissioned, and they would let them go out to sea. And eventually they would find the transatlantic current and be pushed across the Atlantic, and then they would crash upon the eastern shore of North America and South America. And then the paleo indigenous would check out these ships that crashed on the shores, and then they would become infected. And so they were just continuing earlier examples of that biological warfare.
yeah, with germ warfare. And what I asked today, like, is the lens or the vision or understanding of sickness, or as you said, disease, is very different from our ancestors' view. And also graduating with a degree in science, and then learning about virology and viruses and different theories related to sickness. As I understand, they've never isolated a virus. And now that there's alternate theories that suggest that viruses actually are a part of the cleansing of the body. So, depending on what your view is, it actually puts sickness in a very different light. So we understand what bacteria is, but with viruses, it's very different. And what is this actual sickness? If the virus theory, the germ theory that science has established its explanation of, for instance, the 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 new C, I don't know if it's COVID, and all these other viruses. If that's actually not the reality of how these things come about, how does sickness come about, and how does it relate to the spiritual realm? Because our people suffer from smallpox as well. But a lot of our people, our Wirangan, the healers, they managed to get on top of it, and we're here today. So that's the strength of all the people listening today, and of us, is our ancestors survived and overcome these things, and the only reason why we're here is because they were strong in their resilience. So and their spiritual power. So yeah, it just makes you think differently about sickness and how it comes about, and how our old people could cure these things when modern medicine is pushed to be able to even just deal with the symptoms of some of these things, let alone cure it.
Yeah,
Um,
well, the the aspect of healing is necessary for each individual to make critical decisions upon their own existence, especially if you want to go through life in optimal health. Although I am sharing this from the perspective of someone who thought his day was going just grandiose, and then I was ran over by an 80,000 pound garbage truck. So excrement does happen. And so all of us need to utilize critical thinking skills and be honest with ourselves about dis-ease or disease, and do what we know is necessary for optimal healing. So thank you for what you have been sharing, John. And hopefully people will hear words that we have shared to help them find the resources, to find the motivation to look within love without fear to overcome the challenges before us. And I think we're past the 3-hour mark now, Luna.
Yeah, we sure are. I was just going to say we can round it up and say our last things. It's been very enjoyable. So we'll go with our guest first. John, what do you want to say to round up the conversation we've had this evening, this morning?
Yeah, just thank Brother Nese and yourself and all the listeners, and acknowledge, acknowledge all, and recognize also what Nese was saying about healing and about getting wellness, and investing our critical, reflective thinking and our spiritual set presence to walk that path of healing and try to find out the best way forward. So we're challenged with a lot, but we're here because our ancestors survived, and that resilience and strength is built within us. So I'm sure all of us will walk in a good way to heal and get stronger. So thank you all. Thanks, Nese. Thanks, Luna.
Thank you, John, and I hope you come back and yarn with us again another time. I might have to adjust the times because Brother Donny couldn't be here. It's a bit late for him. Otherwise, he would have been here and joined in on this yarn. So either we get up early or we stay up late. But thank you again, John, for your wisdom, your knowledge, and your experiences that you shared with us today. Thank you again, Brother Nese, and I'll let you finish it up and round it up at the end. And love to you on this day. Thank you for listening, and hope you can join us again. Just look out for the reminder button. You got to subscribe and you'll get good reminders. And stay centered. The Creator loves you. There you go, Nese. What do you want to round it up with?
Well, thank you all, miraculous perfection of unique individuals. It is an honor to be here at this precious moment, spending this opportunity of sharing positivity or minimally transmuting the negativity or neutralizing it. And may again we have shared something that helps you find within yourselves the strength to move forward in positivity. And I'm pretty sure that if needed, if you reach out to any of us, that we would be willing to assist in finding your answers. And thank you, Luna. Thank you, John. Thank you, Universe and the chat room. As my ancestors say, Ape Gish Mino Bimad Ziwe Riyan. And as I say more times than not, share the giggles and toodles.
And I just want to go out. Sorry, Nese, I forgot one thing. I'm going to go out on the Marama Dance Ground. And I just want to add that John is a part of a healing ground that he's made here in our community. And if you go to this site, you'll get to see a bit of it, and we'll go out on this music. Thank you again, Nese. Hang in, fellas, and I'll say goodbye to you on the other side of the studio. Thank you, everyone. I
Hey, hey!